Hi everyone, my name is Chip Kidd and I am here to host a panel of graphic novelists. It is Book Your Summer Live graphic novel panel. And we have 6 amazing artists with us today. Tom Sholey, Liana Fink, Reza Farazmand, Dina Mohamed, Pat Dorian, and David Walker. We have an hour. And so that means each panelist has 10 minutes and we're going to have a discussion. And we are going to start with Tom Sholey. Tom is a contemporary comics artist who gained prominence as co-creator of Godland, a Jack Kirby-esque space opera, which was nominated for an Eisner Award for Image Comics. He next drew and co-scripted with IDW editor-in-chief John Barber, Transformers versus G.I. Joe. Recently, he wrote and drew Superpowers, a series of short comics appearing in DC's experimental imprint Young Animal, and Fantastic Four, Grand Design, which is really, really amazing. He also recently completed a modern reimagining of GoBots for IDW. Tom's new book is a biography of the comics artist Jack Kirby. And so, Tom, I'm gonna start off with a question for you that I'm actually gonna ask each panelist, because they're all so amazing and also different. But why do you draw the way you do?
I mean, that's a big question. I mean, where it's the sum total of sort of where I've arrived, but it began sort of like studying painting and sculpture in college, and then I sort of discovered Jack Kirby, and that kind of, it was like Body Snatchers or something. It kind of, that Jack Kirby just sort of took over, like, and sort of pushed everything else out, and I just sort of you know, worked in that like Jack Kirby mode for like years and years. And then maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, started kind of coming out of, you know, working through that enormous influence and started kind of figuring out my own voice and kind of falling in love with like the pencil as a medium and sort of like, you know, flat, simpler colors, which is like where I'm at the moment. I don't know how it's gonna, you know, change further, but that's how I got here.
So your new project is a biography of Jack Kirby. Now, is that completed yet?
Yeah, it's completed. It came out in July, and yeah, it's out in the world, and you know, people are reading it, and it's, you know, making the rounds.
Wow, July is in now.
July is in now. I'm just not sure like when this this panel is going to show up. So,
oh,
so it's
right, that's a good point. I don't. There's a lot of books out about Jack Kirby. What did you feel that you had to say or draw about him that hadn't been said or drawn in the past?
Well, I mean, I wanted to, because this is something I wanted to experience for myself. I would like to have been able to have spent like an afternoon at the Kirby house and had, you know, Jack and Roz kind of show me around and answer my stupid questions and things. And so that's kind of what I wanted to make in this book. I wanted to make it like you're spending the afternoon with Jack Kirby, and he's being exceptionally frank and open, and just kind of, you know, answering all your questions and telling you all about his life and how he got there. Sort of like, you know, these sort of hangs that you would hear about of like people showing up in like the 60s and 70s at the Kirby house, knocking on the door, and then, you know, Roz makes them sandwiches and Kirby regales them with you know, war stories and you know, stories of like the early days of comics.
So is it is it all told like it's in one afternoon, or is it linear from when he was a kid up through to the end?
Yeah, it's more or less linear, you know, from like his parents' youth up until beyond a little bit beyond his death in the epilogue, and it's told in the first person. It's told by Jack, you know, by Jack Kirby, quote unquote.
So how do you handle the whole situation with him dealing with Marvel and dealing with Stan Lee?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like, I figured that's like this, almost like a centerpiece of it. It's you know, probably what like most people coming to the book would be looking for. And so I sort of show their early, you know, relationship when they first met in the 40s, when Stan was a teenager, and then you know their relationship, you know, from there. But I gave, like, since it was in Kirby's first person, there were a couple points where I sort of like had like allowed other voices to come in. So Roz comes in and says her piece, and so I have you know, when we're getting to like the real, like, you know, that 60s Marvel collaboration, I let Stan sort of take over for a couple pages and sort of tell like his side of the story before we get into, you know, Kirby's.
I mean, it's just fascinating. I mean, and to what extent, like, who published the book?
10 Speed Publishing, a division of Penguin Random House.
Oh, great. Which is who I work for, but we're such a big company that I don't always know all of what we're doing. To what extent did you feel, I mean, you do work for Marvel, you do work for DC. I guess my question is, to what extent did you think I need to show this to them, or I'm going to be worried about how I'm depicting these companies in the book?
I mean, I felt like I needed to make this thing just like in isolation and not worry about what anybody thinks. So I didn't even attempt any kind of communication with them. I just sort of, you know, told the story the way I see it, you know, as I've come to understand it over the years, and, you know, let the chips fall where they may. And I mean, there's a precedent for that. I know, like, you know, Frank Miller has said something along the lines of like, you know, like when I work for you, you buy my work, you don't, you know, buy, you know, any kind of, I forget exactly what he said, but, you know, you don't buy my silence, or you don't buy my, you know, and I think that, you know, like the people, you know, working at, you know, Marvel and DC are, you know, understand the story of Jack Kirby and, you know, have like a certain amount of sympathy for it. It's not like this is coming out in like maybe the early 80s or something where there might be like a culture of like, you know, hell no, you know, but like I you know, and you know, I once I finished it, I've sort of sent it, you know, to different people, like, you know, Joe Quesada, just to name a name, but like, you know, people at Marvel, because I mean, I think it's like, I'm, you know, really proud of it, and I think it tells this story, you know, really well. And when I was working on it, I wasn't sure, you know, if it was going to be a happy ending or a sad ending, because a lot of these things were still being litigated. Like the Kirby family, the Kirby estate was, you know, involved in stuff with Marvel, and it looked like it was going to go to the Supreme Court and stuff. So it was kind of up in the air. But by the time I got to, you know, telling the end of the story, it has something of a happy ending. That the Kirby family has sort of, you know, come to terms with Marvel and you know, gotten, you know, compensation or participation, you know, whatever, to their liking. And so now it's like this, and this sort of happy, you know, whatever, you know, bumpy road it took, it sort of, you know, comes around to, you know, a good outcome.
Don't hate me for asking this, but what do you think he would make of the films?
I mean, he predicted the films. He, you know, from a very early age, he said, I'm making, movies here. Like these are gonna be movies one day. Maybe it'll take 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe 30, but these are, he saw them that way. He saw them in widescreen on a big, so I think he'd love it. I mean, when he was alive, there were some movies coming out. There was like a Captain America movie, and he was not thrilled with it. It wasn't, Captain America, the way he would have liked to have seen him. And he had to fight to be credited on it. And then famously, he fought to get his name taken off of it after he saw the movie.
Is that the Matt Salinger one?
It was like Roger Corman.
Yeah.
Yeah. That one. So, I mean, I think as long as he's credited and his family is benefiting financially from it, he'd love it. He'd be all about it.
And what are you working on now?
I am trying to figure that out. I've had like a busy, the past 10 years have been extremely busy, like one project after another. And this Jack Kirby book is kind of like a culmination. It's like where do I go from here? So for now, I'm just playing. I'm, just taking ideas and messing around and seeing if they'll grow into something that'll be the next big work I'm working on. But I'm still in that play phase, which I've been in before. It's actually a lot of fun. It's sort of, what you're working on could end up being anything, and you're not beholden to anyone, and it's really nice. But hopefully, sometime in the next week or month or something, one of them will gel into like the next project I'll spend a year or 2 or 3 or 4 working on.
Wow. Do you think you'll do any more work for Marvel and or DC?
Yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, I'm not dependent on it. I'm not hoping for it. I'm not, praying for it, but I'm open to it. And I did that Fantastic Four grand design, and I felt like, okay, this is all the Fantastic Four story I have to tell. I've told my Fantastic Four story, but then once I finished it, all of a sudden a million ideas started coming to me of like what else you could do with the Fantastic Four. So it's so you just never know like when inspiration's gonna fall into your lap and what form it's gonna take. So yeah, I mean, I'd be open to any of it.
Cool. Well, I think your work is really, it's like joyous. It's great, and I look forward to seeing more of it. And thanks for talking.
Thanks, Chip. I appreciate that.
Okay, next we have Lyanna Fink. Lyanna is the author of Passing for Human and a regular contributor to The New Yorker. She is a recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship, a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, and a 6 Points Fellowship for Emerging Jewish Artists. She has had artist residences with MacDowell, Yaddo, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Center, Headland Center for the Arts, and Willapa Bay. Welcome, Lyanna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So your new book is called Excuse Me, and it's a collection of your cartoons, most of which were in The New Yorker, correct?
No, those were not, I think none of those were New Yorker cartoons. They're all cartoons that I published that I put on Instagram, and a few on The New Yorker's Instagram. Okay,
I apologize. I was reading the description of it here. And of course, it says the acclaimed New Yorker cartoonist.
If that sells it.
So we'll start off with my question for everybody. And actually, first of all, I have to confess, I've been enjoying your work for years.
Are you serious?
Without knowing who does it. And
thank you so much.
And I'm embarrassed because a lot of the New Yorker cartoonists are like that. Some of them's like, oh, it's that person. But a lot of them, I'm like, well, that's funny, and I recognize the style, but I don't know who it is. And so you're one of them. So it's been a pleasure to figure that out and connect it. Um, so how would you describe your style, and why do you draw the way you draw?
My style came to me pretty late. I was an art student, and then, well, first I was a kid, then I was an art student, then I was an aspiring graphic designer, and in all of those iterations, maybe halfway through kid and onward, I was very self-conscious, and I never quite had a style. And I think my style came in my late 20s, partly from having gotten a tiny bit of career, like a good bit of career encouragement, such as like winning a grant and selling a comic book and being forced to work a lot. And then just from sheer anger, like all the trying hard boiled away. I can't remember anymore what made me so angry, but and I'm afraid I'll lose my confidence now that I don't remember, but something happened in my late 20s, and I stopped trying to be very good with like a brush and a nib, and I boiled it down to pen and simplicity and kind of grungy, and that suits me well because I'm not very neat.
Now that you mention it, I can see the anger there in the work, and it's tempered, of course, by the sense of humor, but there are literally a lot of sharp edges to what you do. How do you get the ideas for the cartoons?
When I do a New Yorker cartoon, I have to make myself come up with ideas. I like to kind of take myself out of myself, and that used to involve riding a train for a day, but now it involves just kind of clearing, now that we don't ride trains, it involves clearing my schedule and not doing other work and letting myself doodle for a day, which I wish I did more of, but I have to force myself to do. For the ones that were in Excuse Me, though, those came more from things that came immediately. Like things, like if something made me freak out in real life, like an interaction with a stranger, or back when I was dating, like it would just be this like thing that would have turned into a terrible thought spiral, but later on became, I worked through it by making it into a cartoon.
Have you been tempted to do a lot of cartoons now about being stuck at home, and how that affects you, or are you looking to just go outside, literally outside of that?
I'm not so tempted to make cartoons about this, and I feel really guilty for that, because I think I should be making cartoons about this. Like, for once, I'm experiencing something that every single other person in the country and the world maybe is experiencing, and everyone can relate. But I don't know what it is. It doesn't feel like something I have anything special to say. Maybe there's some like guilt because I don't have it very hard. Like I'm lucky right now. Like, I'm not taking care of little kids. I'm basically able to work and make a living. I don't have a job that puts my life in danger. I get to stay home. So I think I want to kind of diminish that and not make lots of cartoons about it. And my cartoons are usually about things that make me angry. So I'm feeling pretty grateful right now, and I'm not feeling very angry. My cartoons are also all about weird interactions with other people, and I'm having fewer of those now. So I'm actually working more on stories now. I'm working on a graphic novel, and that's coming a lot more easily. I finally understand like why people want to escape into a large fiction rather than making small spiky cartoons.
And the graphic novel, is it autobiographical, or is it completely like outside of being about you?
It's about God, so yeah.
Oh, that person.
It's about a female god. I don't know. I really loved working on it. I don't think it's so good. I think it will be. I'm working with Andy Ward, and he's so brilliant and put so much thought into his editing. I just I've really loved working on it, but I think I added one thing to the Torah, which is like sweetness, but I don't think I added anything else. And hopefully by the time it's published, there will be more.
And the person you just mentioned, I do not know who he is. Where is he an editor?
He's at Random House.
Which imprint?
The Random House, regular Random House.
Okay, all right. And so how is he shaping the story?
I think
if that's the word.
I haven't read his email yet, but I have really high hopes. I did like a very big draft and he just wrote back. I have a feeling he's going to make it, I don't know, I've really enjoyed working with God. I haven't really enjoyed working with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and Joseph. So I think he's going to help me figure out like how to make God the main character, even though she's not really the main character in the Torah after Abraham. I think that's how I feel. I think that's going to be the thing that I confront head on instead of just like not dealing with it.
To what extent, how do I want to say this? Is the concept, to what extent is the concept of a female god strange to the way the story you're telling is regularly told? Is that a way to say it?
I don't know. To me, it feels so normal, and maybe that's, I don't know, I don't think it's normal to other people, but I can't fathom that. And that might be something I need to I need to think about more before I finish the book. To me, I don't know, to me, God has always seemed very childlike because of like the anger and like the jealousy and the intense urge to create things and not editing oneself so much. And that's what I like about God. I don't really relate to the old man with a beard qualities of God.
Well, it sounds great. I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Thank you.
So thank you, Liana. And what is the new book going to be called?
I think Let There Be Light.
Nice. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you so much for talking to me. I'm a very, very big fan of your book covers.
Oh, thank you. Okay, our next panelist is Reza Farazmand. He lives and draws in Los Angeles. He started putting his comics on the internet in college at pdlcomics.tumblr.com and was soon surprised to learn that this activity could make for an actual career. His work has since been featured in and around such places as television sets, websites, magazines, and now this book, which is called City Monster. When he's not writing or drawing, Reza enjoys drinking coffee and looking at things on screens. He is generally a pretty good guy. Hi, Reza.
Thank you for saying that, Chip.
So, City Monster. Why, before we get into that, the question I'm asking everybody, why do you draw the way you draw? Describe your stylistic approach.
My style is very minimal and simple, and I guess pretty not verbose. Like I don't use a lot of words or a lot of images. And I would say my style mostly came about as like a result of necessity, because I'm not like a trained artist in any way, and I didn't actually start drawing until probably like I was 18 or 19. So I wasn't like the kid who was always scribbling away in a notebook or anything like that. And so I just kind of tried to develop the most simple, straightforward style that I could to tell a joke without too many distractions. And I would say that the visual style kind of evolved out of like the sparse writing, and that they kind of work together now in tandem.
So if you didn't start drawing until you were in your late teens, why did you start drawing?
I think, well, I had always liked specifically comic strips, like the Sunday comics growing up. And I always wanted to be a writer, but then I started playing around with visual elements, and I felt like that was an even better way to tell a story or tell a joke or set a scene in a way that kind of brought the reader in and made it funnier as well, because I could like depict facial expressions and stuff like that too.
And what were the comics you liked as a kid? The Sunday
well, I really liked Peanuts. I see you've got Charlie Brown back there, obviously. And Pearls Before Swine was a big one. And then there were a bunch of those like single panel comics for a while. I think like Brevity and Rhymes with Orange. I don't know if those were all always single panel, but yeah, I was definitely informed by those. And those were all like bright, bold colors, strong lines, and like very straightforward art styles. So those probably informed a lot of my like early attempts to develop a drawing style.
And so describe the story of City Monster.
So basically this monster moves from the forest to the city. He's kind of like a Bigfoot type monster, and he moves to this like supernatural city filled with other monsters and ghosts, and he's basically trying to figure out his future, but then his roommate is a ghost who can't remember the past. So he and his neighbors and friends basically work together to try to figure out this ghost's past so that they can kind of move on with their futures.
So when you're creating a story like this, do you have a certain audience in mind?
I guess my audience. I mean, this is my first graphic novel. Up until this point, I've just been doing one-off strips. And yeah, so I'm hopefully wrote this book for the same audience that's reading my scripts right now. Yeah.
And what comics do you read? Any comics regularly that are being produced now?
I read a lot of webcomics. Yeah, so yeah, I guess some big ones that come to mind are like Sarah Anderson's comics. I like The Oatmeal. I don't know, I've got a lot that I like, but can't really think of any of them right now. Yeah, basically any of the big webcomics that you might see on like Instagram or whatever. I'm in that community, so I'm always following the other artists who are working in that space.
And who is publishing City Monster?
That would be Plume, which is an imprint of Penguin. And they've published my other books as well.
And what are some of your other books? Can you describe them?
What was that?
Can you tell us about some of your other books?
Oh yeah, my other books have been collections of my comic strips. And they've typically been like a mix of stuff that's appeared on the web and stuff that I draw exclusively for the books. And I'm always producing comic strips. I put out usually 2 to 3 a week. So every couple of years or so, I have enough that I can kind of put them all in a book and then come up with a bunch of new stuff and yeah, put them out as collections.
And so are you working on a new book now?
No, I mean, I guess I'm always actively working on the collections because I'm always putting out new strips. And then I am definitely working on ideas for my next graphic novel because I'd like to do another graphic novel because I had a lot of fun doing a longer form story.
Do you have a daily routine?
Yeah, I usually wake up like pretty early. I'm usually like at my desk with a cup of coffee drawing by like 7. So yeah, I like to get up, have coffee, and start writing and drawing pretty much right away. Yeah, I feel like I work best from like 7 to noon usually.
Have you found it harder to work during this time, or does it inspire you to work harder, or is it the same?
Yeah, so I have worked in self-employed and worked from home for like 6 or 7 years now. So not a lot changed in my day-to-day routine. My social life has definitely been changed, but my work routine is pretty much the same. And actually for the first few months of the lockdown, I was finishing my book. I was finishing City Monster. So I was like in basically just work mode for those first few months. And it was almost like I didn't look up from my desk. And then when I finally looked up, I was like, oh my gosh, everything is different. So yeah, I was kind of just like in the zone for those first few months anyway. And it was, I didn't really have anywhere to go at that point because I just needed to finish my book.
And you write, draw, and color it all yourself?
Yeah, that's right.
And what technique do you use to color it?
Well, I do all of the pencil and line work with traditional media. So I use pencil and micron pens on Bristol board, but then I scan and digitize it and color it in Photoshop. I colored the whole thing in Photoshop. So just using like the paint bucket tool. And then I developed a palette that was like a little bit different from my typical daily comics, which are a little bit brighter. And for this, I changed the palette to be kind of darker and spookier.
Yeah, I noticed that. It really works. It's really effective.
Nice.
So what do you think you'll be working on next?
I think at this point, I'm feeling like my next big story might be a sci-fi story, and possibly a little bit more out there than this first book. For City Monster, I was trying to make it as like relatable and close to my own experiences as possible. Even though the characters are all monsters, I kept them all pretty grounded in real life experiences for the most part. And so for the next one, I think I want to do something that's like a little bit more outside my comfort zone. But I don't have anything specifically locked in idea-wise yet, but possibly something sci-fi, possibly something taking place on another planet.
And you use what in your mind defines the term monster?
I basically use it as a catch-all for any supernatural creature that might appear in like the classic monster movie canon, like zombies, vampires, the Yeti. They all kind of fall into the monster realm. And I guess in the book, the ghosts and spirits are a little bit separated from the monsters. They're not quite monsters. They're like former monsters.
So it doesn't really have to be, doesn't necessarily have to do with being good or evil.
No, they're all just kind of, yeah, I guess there's not really good or evil. The story is a little bit more, I guess, like grounded and everyday than like fighting a big good or evil force or anything like that. Yeah, they're more just fighting the passage of time more than anything else.
Because the character seems really sweet. Doesn't seem like a monster at all.
No, yeah, they're not. They're all pretty nice and chill toward each other, I would say. I would say the most monstrous creature that appears is a human, actually.
Which makes perfect sense. All right, Reza,
Yeah.
thank you for talking with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
We're going to be talking with Dina Mohammed.
Hello.
Hi. Dina is an Egyptian illustrator and designer. She first started making comics at 18 with her webcomic Agira. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's Kohiro. So it's like starts with a K. Kohiro.
Okay, I'm reading the wrong one.
That's okay.
Her new book is going to be published by Pantheon in, we hope, fall of 2021.
I hope so too.
And it is called Shubeik Lubeik. and that is a fairy tale rhyme, meaning your wish is my command in Arabic. So Dina, we'll start about your drawing style, and you talk about in your bio that that you were influenced by Egyptian comics, and that's a real surprise to me because I did not know that there were Egyptian comics.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of grew up reading a lot of comics that I didn't know were Egyptian because we had like syndicated Mickey comics that were translated into Arabic, but they would often have like covers by Egyptian artists, and they would have like lots of different inserts and just generally like really Egyptianized art. But we also had like, I discovered this pretty late because I actually did my thesis on Egyptian comics. So I was like really impressed to find out that we probably started making comics, I mean, other than like if you consider hieroglyphic comics, which is a whole thing. But like our first proper comics were like around the early 1900s. So like 1923 is like the first Egyptian proper comic. And like just from there, you can like directly trace a line of influence all the way down to like comics now. And we just have a lot of really cool comics history actually that pretty much no one really pays attention to. And part of it is that what I wanted to prove actually is that Egyptians can kind of tell when you show them a comic, whether it's drawn by an Egyptian or not. There are certain styles, there's just certain tics, and we do have like a certain visual identity. And so like actually that influenced my book because we used to have a really big comics culture, but not so much anymore. So now it's like very indie and really underground and pretty limited in a sense. So we're kind of trying to carve out an industry here. So part of what I was trying to do when I was drawing was to make comics that Egyptians would find comfortable to read. So nothing that looks like too manga or too superhero comic, because a lot of those are translated here and like Egyptians love manga and we love reading foreign comics. But because I was specifically creating like an Egyptian story, I wanted people to read it and sort of feel like, oh, this is like comfortable for me to look at. And I think like our visual identity is like really caricature based. It's kind of a little ugly actually, like people like really exaggerated expressions. And so like when I was, this answer is going on for so long. But when I was, when I was working, I was thinking of it in terms of, because I actually studied graphic design. So I was really thinking of it in terms of almost just a way to sort of, I had a target and I wanted to reach it with this style. So a lot of it was just very practical. Like I wanted something that would appeal to Egyptian readers. I needed something that would tell the story I was telling because it's a dense urban fantasy. And it needed to like portray backgrounds well, you needed like backgrounds, you needed expressions, you needed kind of a realistic vibe, but also a little cartoony. And then like, also I was like very constrained by the printing here in Egypt. So I was trying to make it as easy as possible for people to read and print and just as cheap as possible. So I knew it had to be black and white. So I was just kind of going with like how far I could push all of these in a black and white style.
All right, so here's a stupid question. Are you in Egypt right now?
Yeah, I am.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, I live here.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
So when you, tell us a little bit more about the story of Shubeik Lubeik. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's Shubeik Lubeik, so you're very close.
Okay.
It's kind of like, yeah. So the concept of Shubeik Lubeik is it's an urban fantasy. It takes place in a world where you can buy and sell wishes. And the wishes are classified according to their class. So a first class wish is super, super expensive. It would cost like $1 million, but it will grant whatever you want, straight up. But a third class wish, it's cheaper, but it might trick you, like a monkey's paw. So like with a third class wish, if you, for example, wish to lose weight, your arms and legs might fall off. And so basically the idea of it is that I wanted to take the concept of wishes, which is traditionally like really fantastic and really kind of like very high fantasy and just sort of bring it down to a super industrialized, commercialized idea. So like you have all these wish brands, people can just go out and buy a wish. But the thing is, obviously, because of the price difference, there's a huge stratification of who can buy wishes and like who can buy a first class wish as opposed to a third class wish. And so, yeah, and it's set in like an alternate universe Cairo. And the concept of the story is basically this man who owns like I guess you would call it a bodega. It's like a corner stall, a kiosk. So this man who owns a kiosk, he has 3 first-class wishes that have been handed down by his father, and he doesn't want to use them because some people think that wishes are sort of like religiously impermissible, so like haram, or kind of like blasphemous, or I don't know how you would say it, but just basically they think that using wishes is sort of like an affront to God. And so he never wanted to use them, and he also didn't want to earn money from them, but because he has a lot of debt, he decides to sell these 3 first-class wishes at a huge discount. So it's a trilogy, actually. In Arabic, it's a trilogy. It's like 3 kind of smallish books. And so like each part is about who he sells each wish to. And because they're so cheap, so he sells them at this huge discount because he's just trying to like pay off a debt. And so someone who could have never been able to buy a first class wish is actually able to buy one for the first time. And like each story follows a very different person in a very different world buying these wishes.
And is this in any way a traditional Egyptian story, or is this something that you really, I guess, thought up, how do I say this, on your own, or is it an amalgam of something that you learned, was told as a kid?
No, I actually is definitely, so as far as I'm concerned, like our main source of wishes is kind of your main source of wishes, which would be the story of Aladdin, except in Arabic we learn it as like Ala ad-Din. But so it is kind of a folk story, or like a traditional story in the sense of, Shubeik Lubeik is actually like the rhyme that comes from the children's story. It's like when the genie comes out of the bottle, he says something like Shubeik Lubeik khaddamak bin idek, which is like, your wish is my command, basically. But like I said, whether in Aladdin or whether in our, 1001 Night stories, wishes and genie, generally wishes tend to be really focused on the genie. And what I wanted in this story is to kind of take the genie out of the equation. And so wishes are basically products, and everyone is kind of a consumer of them. And so like, for example, in the story, the wishes actually take the shape of like Arabic calligraphy, and they're sort of formed out of the words they ask. So a genie will ask like, what can I do for you? If they're a first class wish, they'll ask, what can I do for you? But if they're a third class wish, they'll be like, what do you want? Because they're rude. And so they're just formed out of those words. They're very indistinct, abstract shapes. And so like, for me, it actually started because I have an obsession with those stalls I was talking about. Because I just think they're very much a mark of Cairo. Like if you go anywhere in Cairo, you see these stalls everywhere, and they're super convenient. They're kind of like mini convenience stores. They're usually for selling like cigarettes, but also just, juice and drinks and water and all that stuff. And they're always super colorful, but they're really, really colorful. And like Cairo tends to be, I hate to promote the stereotype, but it is kind of like a dusty place sometimes. And it's pretty dark. Like the urban landscape of Cairo is really varied, but it's pretty dark and sort of monotone in a sense. And these stalls are always such bright spots of color because they're filled with products. So they're filled with like really bright chips and drinks and like Coke and Pepsi and all that. And so I was really just fascinated by the idea of like a stall that's just selling like a magical object, and just kind of went from there. Like, why would a stall be selling that? And if it works, how does this world work? What's the economy of this world like? What's their culture like? Just kind of went from there.
Well, our time is up. Deena Mohamed, thank you. We look forward to publishing Shubeik
Lubeik.
Lubeik.
Well, the title is still under construction. We'll see where it goes.
All right. Yeah, we look forward to publishing you in a little more than a year.
I hope so too. Yeah. It's third part right now, so almost there.
All right, well, keep going.
Thank you. Also, I am also such a big fan. So you already know this, but thank you.
Next, we have Pat Dorian. And Pat Dorian is a filmmaker and cartoonist whose illustrations have been featured in The New Yorker, The New York Times, and other publications. His animation work includes projects for Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, AMC's The Walking Dead, and PBS. He founded and ran Grand Comics Festival in Brooklyn for 3 years. He teaches animation at the Pratt Institute and School of Visual Arts and lives with his wife and a mountain of books in a spacious closet in Queens, New York. His new book is Lon Chaney Speaks. It is a stunning graphic debut. We just got the copies. The life of the legendary silent film actor Lon Chaney, who was the original Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback of Notre Dame. Pat.
Hello.
Describe your style. Why do you draw the way you do, and why did you draw this book the way you did?
Okay. I have a bunch of influences. I guess starting back in art school, a lot of my teachers were kind of abstract expressionists. They studied with like Deacon Corn. So I was really, I had thought a lot about composition and materials and whatnot. And my other teachers were kind of very figurative painters, all about narrative. So I learned about magical realists and studied artists like Paul Cadmus, and also like German expressionists like George Gross and Otto Dix. Later, when I came to New York, I ended up working in animation. And I was lucky enough, one of my first jobs in animation, I ended up working as assistant to a character designer named Shane Glines. We worked on, it was a production for PBS. It was total crap, but we worked on it for over a year, and then it was canceled. But I learned a lot by working with him. He's like a very, he introduced me to a lot of cartoonists that I had never heard about, such as like Otto Soko, Sid Hoff, Peter Arno, a lot of the classic cartoonists. So I learned a lot about that. I guess one of the things that sort of always stuck with me is a quote that I heard from Robert Frost. He said, "Don't mistake my simplicity for a lack of sophistication." So I've always sort of, that has always stuck with me. So when I approach, like, let's say, when I'm drawing, let's say Lon Chaney, approaching the spreads, I'm thinking about the overall composition, I'm thinking about the materials, like what sort of feeling I'm trying to convey, how dynamic. So I'm thinking not just about the story, but also like, how am I telling the story? What type of line, what is the wash, what are the materials, and whatnot.
And why Lon Chaney? What is it about him that made you want to write a book about him?
He's a genius. He was kind of a champion for outcasts. I always have felt kind of like an outcast, so I sort of, related to that. He was known as the man of 1,000 faces because he was a pioneer in makeup. Before there was even such thing as makeup artists, so he could transform himself. He was, he's a man of 1,000 faces, but he would transform himself into these sort of grotesque characters. But no matter how grotesque they are, he would always portray them as sort of sympathetic outsiders, his portrayals. They weren't just horrific just for horrific's sake.
How did you go about researching this? Because it's interesting because a lot is known about Lon Chaney, but a lot is not, and a lot of the personal stuff. And he didn't, as I understand it, he didn't really give interviews.
No, he was incredibly intensely private. There are a number of biographies on him, so I researched that. I also found what articles, what interviews he did, give interviews where I found those, documentary, watching his films, and basically I filled in the holes. So my idea was that I was trying to create not necessarily a historical document, but trying to capture his essence.
And the films, his silent films, you go into great detail on a lot of those in the book. How difficult was it to track those down and actually watch them?
Fortunately, well, he made over 100 films. So a lot of them, unfortunately, are lost. There is a lot of that have been restored. You could find them on the internet, such as like The Unknown, was directed by Todd Browning, who later directed Dracula and Freaks. So I was able to find a lot of his films that way. Some of them have been put on DVD, so that was possible. Some of his films are also public domain.
And I guess talk about the color palette in your book is very interesting. And how did that, describe it, and how did that come about?
So the color palette, well, a lot of it was influenced by the Sonnet films. So in Sonnet films, up back then they were black and white, but what they do is they would paint them, they would tint them. So for example, if it was kind of a romantic theme, maybe they would paint it with like a rose color, or if it was trying to convey a feeling of sort of like eerie or kind of feeling, they would use maybe a color such as green. So I use those to sort of basically kind of a little bit of a nod to the silent films. For example, that's from The Hunchback. And this, I think, is I also, one of the reasons I also wanted to use the color to sort of break up the novel as far as visually, because there's one narrative in the book, that main narrative, and that has a particular color, and then I wanted to have sort of like hit different notes in the book. So rather than writing chapter 5, chapter 6, using color to sort of convey that it's a separate part, but still connected.
One of the most familiar images to Lon Chaney fans is of him in a movie called, it's London After Midnight, isn't it?
And it's supposedly a cursed film.
Well, okay, so talk about that, because that's just so interesting to me.
Okay, so it was London After Midnight. There's no existing copy of it, unfortunately now. It was directed by Todd Browning. Some people suspect if Lon had lived, he might have taken over the role of Dracula instead of Bela Lugosi. But the story is kind of probably not the best, but the effect is pretty amazing. He pulled back his teeth like this, and he had these kind of like razor teeth, and he kind of had these eyes, and he pulled it down with kind of wires to make it that sort of almost eerie kind of stare. He also built a contraption where we had like bat wings in certain scenes. But it's a very strange film. There's just a few, I think, clips that actually exist today of it. One account was, I believe it was a man in London that he was convicted of murdering, I believe, his fiancée, and he had claimed that basically after seeing the movie London After Midnight, that had visions of Lon Chaney chasing him, and it drove him mad, forcing him to kill this woman that he was, engaged to or romantically involved with.
And that's in real life, like not the movie.
Yes, that's a real life.
Wow.
So he was, it's a pretty, he was an international star, but no one really knew him that much. I mean, he was pretty, he didn't really answer fan mail. He wasn't interested in fame. The only thing that he was really cared about was box office receipts. He didn't like to be photographed without his makeup. I think there was one time where he tried to basically find photos of him without his makeup on and get the negatives and destroy them. I think it was possibly as a way of sort of self-preservation, but also, he wanted the fans to want to know more about him.
And he died quite young, didn't he?
In his 40s, yes. He made over 100 films. All of them were silent films, and he only made one talking picture. And then I believe a few weeks after that came out, that he died. Ironically, of cancer.
Wow.
Smoking too much. It was actually really difficult for him to actually speak while doing the role. He played Professor Echo, a ventriloquist.
Wow. All right. Well, Pat Dorian, thanks for talking with us. Your new book is Lon Chaney Speaks, and it comes out this fall from Pantheon.
Thank you.
Okay, and now we have David F. Walker. He is an award-winning comic book writer, filmmaker, journalist, and educator. He is best known for his work in comics, including Shaft, A Complicated Man from Dynamite Entertainment, winner of the 2015 Glyph Award for Story of the Year, and its sequel, Shaft, Imitation of Life. His work for Marvel Comics includes Luke Cage, Occupy Avengers, Power Man and Iron Fist, Nighthawk, Fury, and Deadpool. He's also worked for DC Comics, Cyborg, Boom, Planet of the Apes, and IDW, Monkey Brain, the Army of Dr. Moreau. He is the creator of the prose young adult series, The Adventures of Darius Logan, and author of the novel Shaft's Revenge, the first new novel starring the iconic Black detective in more than 40 years. He has 2 new books, The Life of Frederick Douglass, a graphic novel biography of the escaped slave, abolitionist, public speaker, and most photographed man of the 19th century, which I did not know. And another book, The Black Panther Party, coming out in January 2021. A bold and fascinating graphic novel history of the revolutionary Black Panther Party. David, welcome. And what comics did you read as a kid, and what influenced the way that you draw?
Well, the comics, I read everything as a kid growing up in the 70s, a lot of Marvel and DC stuff, all the classic stuff that was coming out back then and into the early 80s. But I was also a big fan of Classics Illustrated. I started reading Classics Illustrated and like probably around 3rd or 4th grade, really young. So I had this introduction to, Dickens and Melville and Dumas and folks like that through these, questionable comic adaptations. Some people would say that they're not very good, but, for me to be 8 or 9 years old and being introduced to these writers who I then would go on to read, actually in their entirety unabridged was pretty cool. So I was in love with the medium of comics as a whole, and very drawn to the visual component of it. I was also a kid growing up in the 70s, back when we still had newspapers, and so I would get my grandparents would get the daily paper, and I would go to the comics section and just like obsessively study mostly Charles Schultz for sure with Peanuts, but also Mort Walker and Dick Brown and folks like that. So I was just really obsessed with with the art form as a whole. And but I'm a terrible artist, you know. I mean, I make my living writing and drawing doodles. I would never, as I write, I tend to do thumbnails and stuff like that, but I leave that to an artist to do, because at best you could call mine some sort of like expressionist surrealism or something, but it's really just a bunch of squiggly lines that are almost indecipherable from actual things.
Well, I was reading a comic on your website, and it's just you sort of like talking about what's going on now.
Yeah.
But
oh, go on.
But did you not draw that?
Nope. I had somebody do the art.
Okay. I feel like an idiot.
No, it's everybody thinks I drew that one, but no, I'm that writer who loves comics but doesn't draw well. So I figured out how to navigate the waters of this medium, because it is very difficult, you know, to break in and to make comics if you don't know how to draw. There's this I think almost a prejudice on the side of some publishers and editors, as if writers can't tell visual stories. And I mean, I'm notorious for handing over a script to the artist that's full of like little thumbnails and diagrams, stick figures, that sort of thing, and I never do that for the artist to draw as I have indicated, but to let them know that I know this can be done. You know, a lot of writers who write comics don't understand the limitations of space, the limitations of what can be done in a panel or on a page, or how a sequence should unfold. And I mean, I've studied the best. You know, I was that 8-year-old kid who was obsessed with Will Eisner and Alex Toth and Gil Kane and folks like that. So I really studied the art of comics. I just, for whatever reason, it just never, I was like that kid who wanted to play baseball but couldn't hit the ball, you know, although I could hit the ball because I played baseball fairly well. But I just was never able to make it work in terms of drawing. I think a lot of it was patience more than anything else, but you know, not giving myself the time to develop the skills.
Well, I totally relate, because I too am an occasional comic book writer who cannot draw.
Yeah.
So if you do you know who the artist is that you're going to be writing for ahead of time? And if so, do you write differently for different artists?
A lot of times I know, especially now as my career moves forward. When I was working at Marvel and DC, a lot of times I wouldn't necessarily know initially who the artist was going to be. But the moment I find out who the artist is, I reach out to them. I study their previous work, but I reach out to them and ask them specifically. Sometimes it's just really general stuff, like, is there a limit to the number of panels that you feel comfortable putting on a page? Are there things like that? But then I'll also ask, is there something that you've really wanted to do differently that you haven't done before? Or is there some form of storytelling that you'd like to experiment with, and let's see if we can make that work? Because I do feel that it is a highly collaborative medium, and I feel that your artist should be engaged as much as possible. And you know, some artists have told me, nope, just put it on this in the script what you want and I will draw it. And then others have said things like, oh, I'd like to, you know, try this or try that. And so I do try to treat every single one as a relationship. And you know, fortunately, with these nonfiction books that I've been doing, I knew who the artists were going in. And so there was a lot of time to communicate and get across, you know, we're venturing into a time where this medium is changing, and what we do with the medium is so vast that, you know, like with the Black Panther Party book, the artist and I talked about a lot of the things that we could do, and, you know, how do you make something that could be potentially dry interesting? Because a lot of it's like, you know, you don't want it to just be like, and then in 1967 they, you know, yeah.
And who is the artist on that?
The artist is a guy named Marcus Kwame Anderson. He's out of upstate New York, and he's somebody who I've been a fan of his work for a long time. And when we were putting together the team, myself and the editor, he was one of like 3 or 4 people that I was like, I really want to work with this guy. I like his style. And I think there's some resistance maybe in the beginning because his style is a little bit more cartoony, for lack of a better term. And I had said, you know, we're dealing with this subject matter that's very heavy and very emotionally deep. Let's not get an artist who draws very hyper realistic. Let's get somebody who is a little bit more fun so that there's a contrast, and it, you know, potentially will make some of this heavy-handed subject a little bit more easy to process and not overwhelm people. And it turned out to be a great choice, you know, not to say that I'm a genius or anything, but once in a while I have an idea that works.
And who's publishing the Black Panther Party book? And
that's 10 Speed, which I know that Tom's Jack Kirby book just came out through them, and that's a beautiful book. And they're with Penguin Random House, and they've been great. They're my home right now. You know, I'm renting with an option to buy. I guess I'd like to stay there for a while.
Cool. Well, we hope so too. Who's publishing the Frederick Douglass book?
That was 10 Speed as well. So that came out in 2019, I believe. Yeah, January 2019. And so in a lot of ways, the Black Panther Party book is a follow-up to that. I tell people that it's part of my, you know, Black History series or something. I don't know what the third one's going to be, because both Frederick Douglass and the Black Panthers they were very emotionally draining books. You know, you're studying slavery and abolition and police brutality and civil unrest, and you know, there's no coming home from that because you're working from home. So it's like it's very draining at times. And with the Black Panther Party especially, Marcus and I sort of had to form our own little I guess group therapy session, because some of the stuff was so heavy. And when I turned over the script to him, I said, if there's ever a point where you're just emotionally overwhelmed by what you have to draw, just call me and we'll work through this, you know, because I've already been down this road. You know, there's a part of the book where we're talking about the history of lynching in the South and things like that. And like, it's one thing for me to have to write about it and, you know, study it and write about it, but it's another thing for him to have to draw it and render it and look through the research material. So, but we got through it. You know, the book is done and it looks great, and that'll be out and scheduled for January 2021, which is much more close than we realize, you know.
I hope so. It's been great talking with you. We need to wrap up soon, but so after a project like that, do you just, I mean, we're all taking some time off now, but are you just taking time off, or do you have is there like something to help you get your head out of the intensity of that space?
Yeah, there's, you know, I'm still figuring out what my next book is going to be. I can tell you what it probably won't be, even though I'd like it to be. I just went kind of crazy over the last 6 months and have been studying the history of roller derby. When I was a kid growing up, I loved watching roller derby. It made a comeback about 15, 20 years ago. I'm still a fan of it, but I was like, you know, I'd like to just study the history of it. And so I've been immersing myself in it. It's been very fascinating. And I don't think anybody's interested in that history. But I now know enough about roller derby that I could write a very compelling fictional piece too, set within that world. So yeah, roller derby is where I went. I guess it was, you know, I remember being in junior high and high school and just Saturday afternoons watching that. And
I was mystified by it. I could not figure out, like, how do you win? How do you win the roller derby?
I don't think it's so much about winning as it's just putting on a really good show is what it was about. It was a very carnival-like atmosphere, and I was just fascinated by it as a kid because it seemed like the people that were on the teams, they looked a lot like the people that were like bagging the groceries at the grocery store. It's a very working class sport, and I think that's what drew me to it, and a very, in terms of sports, it's as basic as it gets. It's just people going around a track. There's not much in terms of rules but yeah, I don't think there's really much of winning. It's like watching a car race. You're sort of watching it for the crash, right? You're watching to see what kind of damage can be done.
Yeah, I remember that because I'm a 70s kid too. I just thought it was the weirdest thing.
Oh yeah.
Well, David F. Walker, it's been great talking with you and looking forward to seeing the Black Panther Party book. And thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Okay, well, thank you for joining our panel, Book Your Summer Live graphic novel panel. And thank you to our guests, Tom Sholey, Liana Fink, Reza Farazmand, Dina Mohamed, Pat Dorian, and David F. Walker. Please visit bookyoursummerlive.com to see more.